So maybe your finances aren't in the best of shape. Maybe you're sort of just starting out or maybe struggling to start out. And so we thought it would be good to perhaps share some tips with you for this week's episode of Dollars and Cents about how you might be able to improve your financial condition. And then our other topic today, which is somewhat related to the struggles that people run into about getting started when it comes to their finances. Our other topic is going to take a look at some of those cognitive biases that are just part of human nature that ultimately, though, can prevent us from making the best possible financial decisions. Joining me on this week's episode of Dollars and Cents, Zach Keister. Welcome to the program.
Happy to be here. Always a fun time to join you on the program, Joel.
Well, we like having you as well. Zach, as you know, is one of our certified financial fiduciaries at Nelson Financial Planning, where we got a team of folks, Zach and myself included, who are ready to help you improve your finances. That's a pretty good summary of what we try and do for folks every day, isn't it, Zach?
Absolutely. I would agree so. Yep.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
My name, of course, is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner, certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning as well. You're listening to Dollars and Cents, one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts out there, according to the folks at FeedSpot, also a longtime radio program here in Central Florida.
Also, September 11th.
Right.
So I guess I'll ask you real quick, Joel, where you were on supposedly the day that the world stopped turning, as they call it.
I was right here at the office, as a matter of fact, and obviously not this part of the office because this is the new half of the office here in the studios that we have at Nelson Financial Planning. But yes, we used to. We still have a TV in the lobby out there, but back then, typically the TV would always kind of run like MSNBC or I think it was CNBC. And so it was just unbelievable watching those planes hit the World Trade Towers. You know, it's funny, back then not everybody had a cell phone. So to be able to get those images as quickly and as dramatically, that just was so powerful. I think nowadays we're all maybe just a little bit jaded in terms of the videos that are out there these days.
Right, and it's just right in your face instantaneously.
Yeah,
right there.
Yeah, no, and that's and one of the videos in particular this past week obviously had to deal with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and that's just sometimes you don't necessarily want to see that. That stuff will burn itself in your mind.
Not necessarily meant for the human mind to just consume, if you will.
Yeah. No, I would agree. Hard to believe it was 24 years ago. My wife and I on Thursday were having that conversation. She's like, it's 9/11. She's like, wait, that was 24 years ago. I was like, wow, that went by very, very quickly. Indeed. So we know that there are still many folks out there that are still feeling the impact of that day, as I know we always will here in this country. That is for sure a dramatic day in American history. That's for sure.
Yep. Just need to keep the promise of never forgetting
Right.
forgetting the lives that were given.
Nope. Absolutely. So in other news this past week, we got started, as we always do here in the fall, with sort of our fall round of educational events. We always like to sort of time those to occur every single quarter. The hiatus period, I guess, of sorts would be sort of the July and August period. That's when everybody's sort of traveling, so we try not to have events during that period of time. The purpose of those events, as I said, was to be educational in nature. It's great to see so many people out this past Wednesday. Those events are reserved for clients of Nelson Financial Planning, but a big crowd in attendance, Zach.
Yeah, it was great. Always good to see and mingle around and get to see clients face to face, maybe that we don't necessarily have a whole lot of face to face interaction with. So good to walk around, shake hands, say how you're doing, get a checkup on their personal lives and that kind of thing.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Great opportunity. And to be able to do that casually, I think sometimes when we visit with people in the office, it's kind of a little bit more formal. So the opportunity to see them face to face, sort of in that outside environment, is always nice. And certainly plenty to talk about. Myself and the speaker sort of engaged in a fireside chat format of sorts, and covered a wide range of things, didn't we?
Absolutely. And there's always plenty of things to talk about, I guess.
There was indeed. Interestingly, when we were talking about the economy, and so what we wanted to do here a little bit on the program is just kind of share with you, our listening audience here on the radio and the podcast world, about some of the things that we talked about. Of course, chief among them was the economy, which I guess is kind of in that period where things appear to be not particularly fantastic, but not terribly bad either, sort of in that, I guess the warm porridge, if you will.
Yeah,
not
I would agree
not
with that.
Not too cold,
I would
guess,
agree with that.
if we stay with the Goldilocks analogy. A couple of things, though, that were sort of positive or are positive potentially on the horizon. Obviously, a significant tax policy that passed, and certainly we've talked about that over the course of the summer here. I think you did an episode with Kristen earlier this summer.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, on the One Big Beautiful Bill. Yep.
Yeah, so there's been a variety of podcasts that we've done to kind of break down the different components of that. But you take that, you take what appears to be a Fed starting next week, potentially standing ready to cut rates, particularly with the inflation data that came out on Thursday showing inflation about 2.9%. Markets certainly on Thursday priced in a rate cut. I mean, they were convinced, and you saw that in the market action for Thursday.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And with that, potential rate cut is, always the double-edged sword. Right. So the rates are going to come down, but so is your potential for earnings on your money markets, right?
Sure.
And that's a big pull. That's $7 trillion. So that's a large impact.
Yeah, a big number that we talked about this past Wednesday. I mean, that is a sizable number, well above what you would normally see. But yeah, the market's certainly on Thursday. I think the Dow was up about 600 points, clearly saying, hey, we're pretty convinced that there's going to be a Fed rate cut. Also, of course, you can't have an educational event these days without talking about the impact of tariffs and how they are impacting sort of corporate America and individuals. And I think the issue there is, it's impossible to really predict what the impact is going to be. It's impossible to kind of predict what the next move is going to be on a lot of this tariff stuff. And obviously that on again, off again, creating a lot of uncertainty. I guess the bottom line takeaway that we shared was, look, policy uncertainty is not necessarily a new concept. And corporate America, typically deals with that and continues to go about its business and ultimately in the position to sort of navigate it as best as possible.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the market in general historically has never, ever been any sort of fan of uncertainty, right. No matter what it is, no matter whether they have it, in black and white or not. The market doesn't tend to be favorable to uncertainty one way or the other.
No, absolutely. So, but the counter to that, of course, is the big tax bill. Three distinct incentives for corporate America to really kind of invest and build. There's the bonus depreciation, there's increased expensing limits, there's 100% depreciation of qualified production property, which is basically a fancy word for saying a manufacturing plant effectively. And in particular, because of that, if you juxtaposition that with one of the slides that was put up during the course of the meeting, where it's showing all of that different capital expenditures expected to occur over the course of this country. It's a big number.
It is 130 trillion.
Yeah, no, big
Large
number.
number.
And that's just the expected expense globally between now and 2027. So some interesting stuff indeed. We're going to take a break and continue on here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris and Zach Keister after these messages. The unique thing about these sort of 7 tips that we're going to talk about in this segment of the program is that really designed to really ultimately help people to get started. And a lot of the content in this segment comes from an article by Ali Hussein that was posted on Investopedia, and then we subsequently posted it on our socials this past week. We thought it was a very good article that really talked a lot about how you might improve your financial condition.
Yeah, and just like any habit, getting started is always, whether it's losing weight or what have you, getting started is always the hardest part, right?
That is very
beginning
true.
the habit. So the first step on that is ripping the Band-Aid off, facing the numbers. It's an easy calculation, doing a calculation of what you own versus what you owe to get to your net worth. And we talk about this in our book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents.
No, absolutely, and that's one of the biggest reasons why we're also kind of about to publish the companion workbook as well. The release date for that is going to be October the 10th, and so that's a companion workbook. And of course, one of the things in there, much like you just referenced, is sort of a net worth worksheet. So the purpose of the workbook is, as the name describes, to help you work through some of those financial concepts that we went into great detail in our book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents. So make sure that you call the office and reserve your complimentary copy of that workbook. We're doing some pre-order, pre-sale kind of stuff. What's interesting about a lot of this, Zach, is these tips, and you started us out with kind of the reality of kind of facing the numbers. One of the concepts behind this, all of these, is the importance of just kind of getting started. The notion that it takes time, as you said at the beginning, and that you've got to make incremental changes. But what happens is when you make small changes and you compound that over time, then you can make some really big changes when it comes to your finances.
Yeah, absolutely you can. And you need to get to where you demystify, if you will, these certain things. And this is a way to get started, right? That's the big thing here is just simply getting started at some point.
No, that's exactly right. It's funny. This past week we also had our summer book fair, our Scholastic book fair. I think it's a Scholastic book fair. It's more like sort of like a mini book club, if you will. So every summer, of course, here at the office, we kind of have some summer reading lists that we encourage folks to at least read 1 or 2. And I think Zach, you read them all on the list.
Not all, but 3. Oh,
okay.
just
right.
3.
You're an overachiever. But one of them, which we talked about as a team, because Jamie, if you call the office, one of the folks that will be there to predominantly answer the phone as a live human being is Jamie. She is a former school teacher, so she is very helpful when it comes to sort of organizing these kind of fun little events. And so this Scholastic book fair concept was part of our. So you have the room all decorated with kind of like the Scholastic book fair that you would see at school.
I felt like middle school all over again walking into the room. The banners are up, the books are out. We've got the funny little pens and pencils out. It was fantastic.
Well, what struck me as we were preparing for this segment is that, one of the books that was on the list that I think that I believe you read, I know I read, was a book called, Atomic Habits by James Clear. And, you think about what we're talking about in this segment about how do you improve your finances. You get started. You do small steps. You give it time to have those steps work. That's the whole concept of Atomic Habits, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's like the old analogy of how do you eat an elephant. One bite at a time, I guess.
Right.
Supposedly.
There you go. There's the punchline on that. Small changes over time make big changes. Tip number one, obviously face the numbers. Look at those things like net worth, things like that. What's second on the list?
So another interesting thing, and we do also talk about this in the Dollars and Next Gen Dollars and Cents book, is the 50-30-20 rule, and that breaks out to be 50% necessity, 30% discretionary, and 20% savings. Just a way to kind of form a bucket system, if you will, for your money.
Yeah, so the whole point of having a realistic budget, I mean, that 50-30-20 rule is a great way to kind of utilize the budgeting and to help create different compartments within that budget that are going to ultimately work well for you to help improve your finances. And one of the things that folks can do to help improve their finances is when it comes to a budget, really, I think the biggest issue that people do is they get overwhelmed or they overcomplicate it. Make sure that your budget is simple. Make sure it's easy to use and to update. And in that regard, one of the other tips is to automate things.
Absolutely. Automating is very important, and actually it just takes the stress off of you. That reminds me kind of a story of meeting with a client that we sat together, and they're like, Zach, I keep getting these late payments, and of course, if you make payment late, a lot of times there's a fee on there, varying fees, sometimes $5, $10, sometimes like $50 nowadays.
It can add up quick.
Get very expensive. And they came and said, well, how do I solve this? And I said, I know the answer here. Let's put a budget together and let's automate.
Right.
Let's automate what's important to you, and then that way it's just out of your brain at that point. It just rolls on its own.
Great add-on when you think about budgeting and sticking with it, the notion of then trying to automate some payments, automate not just payments but also savings as well, because that will certainly help to do that. And then one of the things that you may want to even put in that automate category is setting aside money for an emergency fund. Pretty important when it comes to making sure that those emergency funds are established for those emergencies.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. There's actually a statistic that we had found from Bankrate, a report from Bankrate, and this is just makes my stomach turn a little bit. I just feel worried when I read this stat that most Americans, 59% of Americans, cannot afford a $1,000 emergency in today's America.
Yeah, no, that is some troubling statistic. The other part of that, and we talked about that, I think, on a prior show as well, but yet 37% of Americans have experienced that or experienced that on a regular annual basis. So pretty important to get that emergency savings squared away. You mentioned this earlier, Zach, the notion of automating these payments to help improve your credit. Make sure that you're building credit correctly. I think far too often people go into debt, and then that can be very quickly a slippery slope. Debt by itself isn't necessarily awful, but you've got to understand the difference between using it responsibly and using it irresponsibly.
Yeah, and it's a very fine line.
Right.
It takes a lot of, again, with the budgeting itself, there's a lot of self-discipline that comes in play.
No, absolutely. And one of the points of having a budget is to make sure that that way you can find unnecessary expenses and ultimately wind up eliminating those. You'd be surprised at how things can add up. Number of streaming services, or if you're eating out a bunch, or things like that.
Yeah, they can really add up very quickly. Specifically, say like a bar. You go out to, it's a weekend, if you will. So you go out to a bar. Those drinks can add up very, very quickly. So one of the suggestions would be to maybe go to a friend's house and get together and make drinks there instead.
Become your own expert cocktail craftsman, if you will, as a way to save money. Man, that is probably, most people haven't heard that on a financial show as a tip to become better in your finances. But figure out how to make your own drinks. There's like $20 at some places when you're going out and dining. We're going to take a break here on Dollars and Cents and continue the conversation after these messages. So before the break, we were talking a little bit about, kind of just joking around and becoming your own cocktail craftsman, if you will, as a way to save money. But it's those kinds of things. And if you think about some of the creative things that you can do to try and save money and sort of reduce and avoid those unnecessary expenses. And I guess that ties into sort of the seventh point of this article, Zach. And what's that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all these things are very, very important, and you're really bringing a lot together here. And
being kind to yourself,
yeah,
after all,
right?
right? I mean, you've got to be kind to yourself, and that's an important part of it. I guess that ties in well with the cocktail conversation.
I would say so. Well, I mean, look at it. If you're already going through the struggle, this is going to be a struggle. Being honest, the first time you try to make a budget, particularly the first month or two, it's going to be rough, right? You're going to miss some expenses, some things might fall off, some new things might come up, and you think, I'm spending so much time on this, how can I figure this out? And that goes back to your point, Joel, of being simple from the start. Not putting down absolutely every little thing possible. So at the end of the day, you got to be kind to yourself and think, okay, well, maybe I missed this, but I'm not going to miss it next month.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, it's one thing if all of a sudden you're like, you just throw up your hands and say, yeah, forget it, I can't do it. The stress, the anxiety, trying to navigate all of this. No, it's not about that. It's not meant to be a process that berates you or makes you feel bad. It's a process that ultimately evolves until you get better at it. No one starts out managing their finances perfectly.
No, not in any case. And when you go through that very first step, that might be a little staggering for you. Facing the numbers, coming up with your net worth, particularly if you have a negative net worth, that's not going to necessarily feel so great in the beginning.
No, that is true. That's certainly number one in terms of those 7 tips that we were giving. And then it was making a realistic budget. I think, Zach, you mentioned the whole notion of using that 50% on necessities, 30% on discretionary, 20% on savings. That's a great rule to sort of adapt or intertwine into your budget.
Yeah, it's very, very important, and sticking to it simplistically is a very key term on that. And then we got into automating what's important, right? Your mortgage or rent or your car payment. Don't want to miss out on those. So just make it a little bit easier on you if you run the automation.
And then don't forget to automate those savings as well. The sooner you can start that, the more you'll be able to experience compound growth. And then, of course, having that emergency savings fund. You got to have that. That's a tough statistic you shared earlier, Zach, about how many people don't have that.
That's always something that I feel like we bring up pretty frequently on the show, having the emergency fund, just because we see the statistics and we see it in real life.
Yeah, majority of folks don't have any of that. And then to put all of it together, it's important to build credit correctly. And so that's something that you want to do on a regular basis as well.
Absolutely, and then it's a fine line, right? Like we talked about. One little, it's a slippery slope, if you will, on the debt side of things.
Sure. Nope. Absolutely. Because once you wind up having a credit card balance, it's really hard to overcome some of the rates out there. I think the average rate is around 25%, something like that. That's hard to overcome.
It's hard to overcome nowadays. Absolutely.
Indeed. And then looking to cut out those unnecessary expenses. That's always a good financial tip. And then that's where our craft cocktail, homegrown craft cocktail comes into play. And then lastly, that notion of being kind to yourself.
Absolutely. Well, the advantage of being your own home cocktail crafter, you can make it exactly how you like.
There you go. Indeed. Or you could do a mocktail as well.
Sure.
You don't have to be. Although the mocktails these days, looking at some of these menus, mocktails these days are kind of like almost
same
as
price.
Expensive as I'm like, wait a minute, somebody's making a profit here. Anyway, we're going to segue now into sort of the other thing that we wanted to talk about in the program today, and that is, and again, these topics are pretty related when you stop and think about it, and that is this notion of cognitive biases. And, which at the end of the day, there's no way to get around them. As a human being, we are hardwired to have these types of biases because we use them to process information quickly and then not necessarily inherently bad. They're used to help us process through in an incredibly complex world, but they can also sort of trick us and mislead us and push us into making some not ideal financial choices.
Absolutely. And, like you mentioned, they are hardwired. They are part of our human makeup, if you will. So we'll go through 4 of them here and a small definition, then we'll kind of break them down. So the 4 cognitive biases are the illusion of control, the hindsight bias, the anchoring bias, and the recency bias. The illusion of control is the tendency to believe we have more influence on something than we do, an outcome than we do. The hindsight bias is I knew that was going to happen. I knew it was going to happen all along. The anchoring bias is over-relying on the first number or first piece of information that you receive. And then recency bias is the tendency to give disproportional weight to events that were recent compared to long-term.
Well, and all of those, as we said, I mean, those are all part of being a human. So they apply wherever you are on your journey. You may say, "Oh, well, this is only designed to help someone just starting out." But we've seen people that are become victim almost to these biases at every point on someone's individual financial journey. So I guess we'll start with the illusion of control, which I thought was an interesting one, and actually one that we don't mention specifically in our book, Next Gen Dollars and Cents, but it sort of is the overarching concept that is behind these types of biases.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this bias is about thinking how we feel that we can control outcomes of situations. And this comes up all the time in finance. And this is the situation of where investors think that they can predict what's going to happen short term on stock movements. Another example would be the gaming industry, thinking that I can will my way into this slot machine paying me money kind of a situation.
Well, and that, and obviously the statistics on that are clearly not in your favor. There's that study that came out a few years ago showing something like 97% of day traders lost money over a 300-day period of time. That's a pretty tough record to get in front of. That is for sure. And so you got to watch out for all of that.
Yeah, that is definitely interesting. Very tight. So only 3%. So that's not many folks.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the 3%. Those might have been one of the ones that just held it in cash and didn't do anything differently, I guess. The reality is, I think, look, this is normal human behavior, and one of the things about us as humans is that we do like predictability. So the concept behind these biases is that they provide some sort of sense of control, which obviously is comforting, even if it's perhaps an illusion. It certainly gives us all a sort of a coping mechanism against uncertainty, and certainly there's a variety of ways in which you can kind of sort of defend against the illusion of control. And Zach, that we were talking through as we were preparing for the show, you've got some specific sort of examples on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. And illusion of control is just human nature, right? We want to be comfortable. We want to feel like we can predict what's going to happen. So some of the ways that you can defend the illusion of control is to acknowledge the randomness. Yeah. And, of course, like we always talk about on this show as well, diversify. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's something we talk about very frequently on the show, being diversified and being able to recognize the uncertainty and being able to spread out your risk.
No question at all. And the reality is you want to be focusing on kind of more the process, not necessarily the outcome. I think if you're trying to control returns or you're trying to measure your return every day, that's not necessarily what you can control. What things that you can, in fact, control are things like how much money are you saving, how much money are you putting into that employer plan at work, what's your expenses, what's your asset allocation. Those are always all within your control. So the important part is to focus more on that and not sort of what did I do today in terms of kind of the overall performance.
Yeah, and embracing what you can't control can help you gain some stability over time as well.
Right, which gets us, I guess, to the next bias that we're talking about today, and that is this notion of the hindsight bias that ultimately says, well, you have a tendency to look at past events and say, you know what, I knew it all along. That was going to happen. I heard that a lot back in 2008 during the course of the financial crisis. So we're going to take a break here, and we will continue here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris and Zach Keister of Nelson Financial Planning. Well, here we are rolling through kind of the conversation that we've been having about cognitive biases and their role or their impact as it relates to our financial decisions. And Zach, they're just a part of life, as part of
human nature. Part of human nature.
They help us at the end of the day. They help us process complex information quickly
and make decisions, right?
And make decisions. And the reality is, though, that you have to understand them because they can also lead you to not necessarily make the best of decisions. And so before the break, we were talking about the illusion of control, the notion that, I can control, what's happening. And the reality is you really can't.
Not in the large things in the world. We might think we can or wish that we could, but not in the large scale of the world today.
Not going to control what the Dow, the S&P 500, and the NASDAQ are going to do tomorrow. So focus on what you can control.
And you will get a little bit more certainty, if you will.
That is for sure. So what you can control is how much you're saving, how much you're putting away, money in your pocket and into your employer plan. We had shifted gears to talk a little bit about the hindsight bias as well. That's the ever popular.
I knew it. I knew it was happening.
That was going to happen. I knew it. Okay. Yep. Well, I predicted that. No, you didn't. But the amount of times that we've certainly heard that, it really does. The memories of a fascinating kind of thing. I think back to 2008. I think those memories can trick you into thinking, well, that housing bubble. I knew that was kind of going along out there, and that was going to have some major economic implications. Very hard to see that when you're in the middle of it.
Yeah, absolutely. The thought of, I absolutely knew that was going to happen. It was obvious the whole time. The signs were there, kind of a thing.
And I guess that leads to sort of one of the biggest issues with hindsight bias is it does have this tendency to sort of create overconfidence. It makes you think that you can do all of this stuff, and the reality is you can't. And overconfidence can become a real problem.
It can be very, very dangerous. Absolutely, very, very dangerous. Particularly when you get through the thought process of, through hindsight bias. I knew that happened all along, so I'm going to be able to predict what's going to happen going forward. That's the scary side.
The issue is that when you kind of let that sort of cloud your judgment, it really does. It sort of prevents learning. It prevents learning from those mistakes. And I think that's an important thing to always keep track of when it comes to the things that ultimately you face when things don't go as well as you'd like them to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And so some of the ways that you can combat that bias is embracing uncertainty. And in the forecasting and, being upfront about that predictions are probabilistic and not guaranteed.
No, and I think another suggestion you had, Zach, on this one, and we were talking it through while we were prepping for the show, is this notion of keeping a decision journal, which I think is a really cool concept because then that gives you the opportunity to kind of reflect back and learn from those mistakes.
Absolutely, and I do that personally, Wells. Yeah. I do it on the personal basis of a lot of different decisions that I make in my personal life, and then it is kind of interesting to go back, and I've done it for a couple of years now, to go back, say 3 or 4 years, and say, oh, well, that's a choice I made. How has that played out since then? Some of them are good. maybe not all of them so good. So
that's okay. That's all part of what we're talking about. Not every financial decision you're going to get perfect. We're here to help you make better ones to ultimately improve things over time, which leads us to sort of the next bias, which is this whole notion of the anchoring bias.
Which is getting the first piece of information or the very first number, and then that sticks in your brain, and that has an overarching amount of importance to you. But maybe, and it doesn't necessarily mean that much, right? It's just the first number that you saw, or the first thing that you saw. So then you base your decision off of that number.
Well, and that number could be totally arbitrary, it could be totally irrelevant. It's kind of like, if a house, you get a house that you're interested in maybe buying, and you see it on the market for $500,000, and then all of a sudden it goes off the market, comes back on the market, it's $450,000, and you say, wow, wait a minute, I saved $50,000. No, you didn't. Maybe the house was only worth $450,000 to begin with.
Right. Yeah. Or another example would be, say you're going to work where your buddy works, and your buddy tells you, "Hey, I make $60,000," and the job is posted, and they offer you $58,000. Well, you're not going to feel so great about it. Well, even though in the industry that job is typically only paying $50,000, so you're still getting paid $8,000 more, you're not going to feel great because your buddy is making $2,000 more than you are.
No, that's the problem with anchoring, is that it basically acts like an anchor because it skews your objectivity. We see it all the time when it comes to the financial markets, right? Investors, I paid $100 for that stock, and ultimately, that's what it's worth, even though maybe the fundamentals of that company might have changed dramatically.
Right, and so some folks will refuse. For example, if they bought 100, they might refuse to sell at 90 because they think, well, I'm in it at 100. So that kind of situation. So strategies to combat anchoring would be gathering multiple data points instead of fixating on one number. Build a range of multiple sources and ask yourself, this is an interesting point, what would I do if I didn't know the anchor? What would I do if I didn't know this number? How would I react?
That's a great point. We'll cover the last one here, recency bias. This is the one where we have a tendency to put too much on most recent events. Give us some examples and some ways to sort of combat against that, if you will.
Sure. For strategies to go against recency bias would be to zoom out. Look at the big picture. So if you're focused on, for example, what the market has done like the last 6 months, say it's gone up consistently over the last 6 months, well, the average person is going to have the notion of, it's going to continue. Or the flip side, the market has had a correction, and so the doom and gloom is very prevalent at that point. So you might want to zoom out and look at it a little bit from a historical perspective, more long term.
No, and I think, Zach, I think I have some concerns just in particular where we are market-wise these days about how the impact that this recency bias is having on people, because there has been a pretty good market run over the course of the past few years, and you worry that people are getting too accustomed to risk, getting too aggressive in the kinds of things that they invest. You've certainly got a lot of what I would view as risky asset classes that are really kind of going up pretty quickly. So watch out for that recency bias. So with that, hopefully you got some perspective as a listener here to the program on how to combat some of those basic human emotions that are a part of us all. We're going to wrap it up and get on out of here. This has been Dollars and Cents with Joel Garris and Zach Keister of Nelson Financial Planning.